This is a dissection of combat timings in Quest for Glory 1, so you want to be a hero. Now, in Quest for Glory, combat is not the main attraction. It's a puzzle that some types of characters are better at and some types of characters are worse at. What I want to focus on is the timings, tells, and feedback in the combat system. As a quick rundown, combat in Quest for Glory is rather slow-paced and simple by modern standards. The hero can stab, slash, parry, or dodge, and that's about it. Magic-using heroes can switch to magic mode, replacing those actions with Zap, which boosts your next stab, and Flame Bolt, which does magic-based damage, but otherwise, that's basically it. Where the complexity comes in is the combat timings. Every enemy in the game has animated tells that warn you before an attack, and the closer to the right spot in the animation that you dodge or parry, the more successful that action is. It also determines when they're vulnerable to weapon attacks. Goblins use heavy maces, so they have wide swings that make them easy to predict, and only 2 or 3 real patterns. They do have shields, but they use them fairly rarely, and are actually still vulnerable to stabbing attacks for most of their shield animation. This makes them very good early game fodder. They're still as brutally challenging as is expected for a Sierra game of that era, but once you learn their patterns, you can take them on no problem even with a fresh character or one that isn't built around combat. Saurus are almost always vulnerable to attacks, but they don't have any weapons or shield, so they simply hit very, very hard, as befitting a 6-foot-tall carnivorous lizard. They only have 2 main patterns, to lunge in for a bite or swing their neck barely out of reach. This makes them simple to deal with for combat-focused characters, but troubling for magic users and thieves who frequently crumble after 1 or 2 dodges. Bandits are much more likely to give starting characters trouble. They use spears and shields, and they frequently hide behind their shield, making them require precise timings to land a hit. They only have really 1 attack, but the timings on each part are randomized. They rear back a little, then more, then thrust forward with a random amount of pause. There's also a good chance that after starting to rear back, they'll instead back out and raise their shield, which makes any player that attempted attack vulnerable at the worst and waste stamina at the best. Given that, in this particular game, running out of stamina kills you, unlike in the original, but in the remake, it does. That makes bandits quite deadly, despite what their stats on paper may have you believe, as naive fighters or those who are just trying to get things done quickly waste all of their stamina trying to take out a simple bandit. And bandits are in droves in this game, so it's something you have to manage. The Ogre is a unique enemy fought only once per game. It has 2 main states, standing back and leaning forward. The Ogre leans forward to attack, and then swings his club a random number of times before stepping back. It can also be forced back while leaning forward by landing a hit on it during this state. While standing back, the Ogre can flail its arms around or step to the side, but it doesn't really do anything other than that. While stepped back, it's vulnerable to magic, otherwise it's only vulnerable while leaning forward or just after finishing an attack. All the Ogre's attacks are slow and telegraphed, but due to it being designed with the intent that only combat characters can actually fight it, its stats make it nearly impossible to dodge, even if you know the timings, unless your character also has high stats. I personally believe that this is the most poorly designed combat enemy in the game. My theory is that it was tested with mid to high level combat heroes, making the timing window less apparent, as the higher your stats are, the more forgiving the windows on the dodges actually are. It's also one of the few enemies that got little to no change between the original and the remake in terms of statistics, so it's also possible that they simply ran out of time to balance an enemy that 2/3 of players were expected to avoid instead of fighting. All creatures also make a sound when hit, as does the hero. Given the limited frame rate that the game runs at, it's often the case that what looks like a hit may have missed or will look like a dodge was actually too late. The audio feedback is critical for keeping the player informed without taking their eyes off the action.